The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the marble hallways of the penthouse like a gunshot, but Ellen Ripley didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Her breath hitched in her throat, coming in jagged, shallow gasps as she fumbled with the heavy silk of her hem, trying to shove her passport deeper into the lining of her suitcase. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the scent of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of impending violence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seoul skyline glittered, a sea of neon lights that felt more like a cage than a city. She was 5 minutes away from the service elevator. 5 minutes away from disappearing. "You're making a mistake, Ellen." The voice wasn't loud. It was a low, melodic rumble that vibrated in the very marrow of her bones. She froze. Standing in the arched doorway was Arthur Pendragon, his tailored suit jacket discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, intricate ink of dragons coiling around his forearms. He didn't look like a man who had just returned from a board meeting. He looked like a predator who had found his prey trying to hop the fence. His dark eyes didn't drop to the suitcase. They stayed locked on her left hand, specifically the cold, heavy band of platinum and black diamond circling her ring finger. "The deal is over, Arthur," Ellen whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "The civil unrest in the north is settled. Your rivals think I'm the daughter of a billionaire and the distraction worked. You have your territory back. Now let me go." She took a step toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But Arthur didn't move. He stepped into her personal space, the heat radiating off him clashing with the chill of the air conditioning. He reached out, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they clamped around her wrist, lifting her hand between them. "You think this was a play act? You think I put that on your finger just to fool a few street thugs?" Arthur's grip tightened, not enough to bruise, but enough to remind her that he could snap her bones if he chose. He leaned in, his lips inches from her ear. "That ring isn't leaving this house, Ellen. Neither are you. Not today. Not ever." Ellen tried to jerk away, a sob rising in her throat. "It's just jewelry. Take it. Cut it off if you have to, but I'm leaving." Arthur's laugh was a dark, jagged thing. "Take it? If I took that ring off you, the vultures circling this building would tear you apart before you hit the lobby. You aren't just my wife, Ellen. You're the vault. You're the key. And if you walk out that door, you're a dead woman walking." The weight of the ring suddenly felt like a lead shackle. As Arthur's eyes burned into hers with a terrifying mix of possession and something that looked dangerously like desperation, Ellen realized the trap hadn't been the marriage. The trap was the very skin she was wearing. "Hello to every single one of you joining us today. It is so wonderful to have you here for this journey. Whether you're watching from the bustling streets of New York, the quiet corners of London, or anywhere else in the world, how are you doing today? We've been working so hard to bring you stories that touch the heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and joining our family. It means the world to us and ensures you never miss a moment of the drama. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I love reading your stories as much as I love telling mine. Now let's dive deeper into the shadows of the Pendragon Empire. Ellen felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean, the vault?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He turned her hand over, his thumb tracing the underside of the band. "Look closer," he commanded. He pulled a small jeweler's loop from his pocket, an odd item for a Mafia don to carry, yet he held it with practiced ease. He pressed it against the inner metal of the ring. "Look." Trembling, Ellen leaned in. Through the magnification, the smooth platinum transformed. What she had thought were mere scratches or a designer's hallmark were actually thousands of microscopic lines, etched with a precision that defied human hands. It was a code. A sequence of coordinates and encryption keys so dense it looked like a shimmering thumbprint. "My father didn't trust banks," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "And he didn't trust his sons. He hid the location of the offshore accounts, the black site ledgers, and the private keys to the cryptocurrency reserves in a place no one would dare touch. The wedding ring of the matriarch. By wearing that, you are the legal owner of the Pendragon legacy. If you leave, the assets are frozen. If you die, they vanish. And if my enemies get that ring, they don't just kill me. They erase everything I've ever built." Ellen pulled her hand back as if the metal had turned white hot. "You lied to me. You told me I was a substitute. You told me I was just a body in a dress to keep the cameras busy." I needed someone no one would suspect, Arthur countered, his eyes flashing. A woman with no ties to the underworld. Someone pure. Someone like you. But I underestimated one thing. What? Ellen snapped. Arthur took a step closer, his shadow looming over her. I underestimated how much I would enjoy seeing it on your finger. You wanted an out, Ellen? There is no out. You are the queen of this empire now, whether you want the crown or not. As the realization settled in, a heavy silence filled the room. Ellen looked at the suitcase, then at the man she had lived with for 6 months. A man she realized she didn't know at all. The mystery of her life had just turned into a death sentence. The silence that followed Arthur's revelation was heavy, suffocating like a velvet shroud. Ellen backed away from him, her heels clicking sharply against the cold marble until her calves hit the edge of the mahogany bed frame. She looked down at the ring, the black diamond mocking her with its cold, dark shimmer. For the last 6 months, Ellen Ripley had played a role she never auditioned for. Growing up as the daughter of a disgraced academic, Ellen had spent her life trying to be invisible, to be the quiet girl who corrected manuscripts and lived in the margins of other people's brilliance. Her deepest desire wasn't wealth or power. It was simple, quiet autonomy. She wanted a life where she didn't have to look over her shoulder, a life far removed from the debt her father had incurred before his disappearance. That debt was the very reason she was here. Arthur Pendragon had bought her, not with flowers or romance, but by erasing a ledger that would have seen her spent in a very different kind of underworld. She had convinced herself she could handle it. She had told herself that being a placeholder bride was just another administrative task, a temporary inconvenience. But as she looked at Arthur now, she realized she had been a fool. Arthur Pendragon was a man of jagged edges and hidden depths. He wasn't just the boss of the most feared syndicate in Seoul. He was a man obsessed with legacy. His father, the legendary Vito Corleone, a name whispered in fear across the docks, had raised him in a world of blood and betrayal. Arthur's greatest fear wasn't death. It was being the one who let the Pendragon flame flicker out. He carried the weight of 1,000 families on his shoulders, and he did so with a chilling, calculated detachment. Yet in the quiet hours of the night, Ellen had seen him staring out at the city, his jaw tight, his eyes reflecting a loneliness that felt as vast as the ocean. "Why me, Arthur?" she asked, her voice stronger now, though still laced with the salt of unshed tears. There were dozens of women from the families. Women who knew the rules. Women who would have killed for this shackle. Arthur walked toward the window, his back to her. "Because they would have used it against me, Ellen. A woman from the families would have known exactly what she was wearing. She would have negotiated. She would have held my empire hostage from the moment the priest finished the blessing." He turned, his silhouette framed by the neon glow of the city. "I needed someone who didn't want the power. I needed someone who would be safe because she was too innocent to be a target. Or so I thought." At that moment, the heavy oak doors of the master suite swung open. Clarice Starling, Arthur's head of security and the only person he seemed to truly trust, stepped in. Clarice was a woman of ice and steel, her hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her last name carried the weight of a fallen military dynasty, and she served Arthur with a ferocity that bordered on religious. "Boss," Clarice said, her eyes flicking briefly to Ellen with a look that was part pity, part annoyance. "The Kim faction is moving. They've picked up chatter about the substitute's flight plans. They don't know about the code yet, but they know she tried to leave. They think there's a rift." Ellen felt a cold shiver race down her spine. The Kim faction, the most brutal rivals to the Pendragon name. "And?" Arthur prompted, his voice dropping an octave. "And they're not waiting for a divorce," Clarice replied. "They've sent a recovery team. They're in the building, Arthur. The service elevator you were planning to use, Ellen? It's already been compromised." Ellen's heart skipped a beat. Her escape had been a neon sign for their enemies. Her desire for freedom had just put a target on both their backs. Arthur didn't panic. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. He crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching out not to grab Ellen, but to pull a concealed drawer from the nightstand. He pulled out a sleek, matte black handgun and checked the chamber. "You wanted to leave this house, Ellen," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierce intensity. "But now the house is the only thing keeping you alive." Clarice locked down the floor. "Get the red room ready." "Arthur, please," Ellen whispered, the reality of her situation crashing down. I didn't mean to. I know what you meant to do, Arthur interrupted, his voice surprisingly soft for a man holding a weapon. You wanted to go back to your books and your quiet life. But the moment you put that ring on, your quiet life died. You aren't a ghost anymore, Ellen. You're the sun, and every planet in this city is about to start orbiting you. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before he pulled it back, as if afraid his touch might break what little resolve she had left. In that moment of hesitation, Ellen saw it. A flicker of something that wasn't power or control. It was protection. It was a man realizing that the tool he had used to secure his empire had become the only thing he actually cared about saving. Stay behind me, he commanded. And whatever you do, do not take off that ring. If it leaves your finger, the security protocols in the vault trigger a global wipe. We lose everything, and the Kims will have no reason to keep you alive for the interrogation. Ellen looked at her hand. The platinum felt heavier than ever, a 1,000,000-ton anchor dragging her into the depths of a war she wasn't prepared for. She realized then that Arthur wasn't just her captor. He was her only hope. And Arthur? He realized that by binding her to him with a ring of secrets, he had accidentally bound his heart to a woman who had every reason to hate him. The lights in the penthouse flickered once, twice, and then plunged them into a terrifying, expectant darkness. The siege had begun. The darkness wasn't empty. It breathed. In the sudden gloom of the penthouse, the only light came from the red emergency strobes pulsing along the floorboards, casting long rhythmic shadows that looked like grasping fingers. Ellen's pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, deafening and frantic. She felt Arthur's hand clamp onto her shoulder, not to restrain her this time but to guide her. Don't make a sound, he breathed, his voice a ghost of a whisper against her temple. The silence was shattered by a muffled thud-thud-thud, the sound of suppressed gunfire echoing from the floor below. The Kim faction wasn't just coming. They were clearing the building with professional, lethal efficiency. Ellen realized with a jolt of pure terror that the men downstairs weren't looking for a negotiation. They were looking for the vault. Arthur, Ellen hissed, her knees shaking so violently she could barely stand. We have to call for help. The police, There are no police for people like us, Ellen, Arthur snapped, pulling her toward the back of the suite where a seamless mirror wall hid a reinforced steel door. There is only the law of the blade and the bullet. Clarice, status. Clarice's voice crackled through a concealed earpiece, but it was audible in the small space. They've bypassed the biometric scanners on the 48th floor. They have a tech specialist with them, boss. They aren't just here to kill, they're here to harvest. They know about the micro-engraving. Arthur swore under his breath, a raw, guttural sound. He slammed his palm against a hidden sensor, and the mirror slid open to reveal a narrow, dimly lit corridor, the Red Room access. As they stepped inside, the main doors to the bedroom exploded inward. The blast threw Ellen forward, her screams swallowed by the roar of the percussion. Dust and shattered mahogany filled the air. Through the haze, she saw 3 figures clad in tactical gear, their faces obscured by matte black gas masks. They didn't look like mobsters, they looked like soldiers. Secure the asset, one of the men shouted in Korean, his voice distorted by the mask. Arthur didn't hesitate. He shoved Ellen behind a reinforced pillar and leveled his weapon. The room erupted in a chaotic symphony of muzzle flashes and splintering glass. Ellen curled into a ball, her hands over her ears, the black diamond ring catching the flickering light of the gunshots. She watched, paralyzed, as Arthur moved with a terrifying, calculated violence. He wasn't just a boss, he was a warrior. He took down the first man with a double tap to the chest, then lunged forward, using the second man as a human shield as bullets from the third attacker chewed through the expensive upholstery of the bed. But then the twist. From the shadows of the hallway they had just tried to enter, a 4th figure emerged. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit that looked identical to the ones Arthur's own men wore. It was Rick Blaine, Arthur's second-in-command and the man who had stood as the best man at their wedding only months ago. Rick. Ellen gasped, her voice barely a croak. Rick didn't look at her. He looked at Arthur. In his hand was a high-voltage pulse stunner. Before Arthur could turn, Rick pressed the device into the small of Arthur's back. A jagged arc of blue electricity lit up the room. Arthur's body went rigid, his muscles seizing as a strangled cry left his throat. He collapsed to the floor, the handgun clattering away across the marble. "I'm sorry, Arthur," Rick said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But the Kims offered a seat at the table that you were never going to give me. And they don't care about the legacy. They just want the liquid assets." Rick turned his cold, calculating gaze toward Ellen. He stepped over Arthur's twitching body and reached for her hand. "The ring, Ellen. Give it to me and I'll make sure they kill you quickly. If you make them take it, well, they have tools for that." The betrayal cut deeper than the fear. Ellen looked at Arthur, the man who had lied to her and trapped her, yet was currently gasping for air on the floor because he had tried to shield her. Something shifted inside her. The substitute bride, the quiet academic's daughter, felt a surge of white-hot protective rage. She looked at Rick, her eyes narrowing. "You want the ring?" She held out her left hand, the platinum shimmering. Rick reached for it, a greedy smile pulling at his lips. But Ellen didn't drop her hand. She balled it into a fist and swung with every ounce of terror-fueled adrenaline she possessed. The heavy, sharp-edged black diamond caught Rick squarely in the temple. The sound of the impact was sickening. Rick let out a choked yell, stumbling back as blood began to pour from a jagged gash on his forehead. "Arthur! Get up!" Ellen screamed, scrambling toward the fallen boss. Arthur's hand shot out, his fingers locking around her wrist, not to stop her but to use her as an anchor. He forced his body to respond to his will, his eyes clearing of the electrical fog. With a roar of effort he lunged upward, tackling Rick before the traitor could recover. "Go!" Arthur yelled at Ellen, pointing toward the end of the secret corridor. "There's a chute at the end. It leads to the garage. Clarice is waiting." "I'm not leaving you," Ellen cried, the words surprising even her. "The ring is the Empire, Ellen," Arthur shouted as he wrestled Rick's gun hand toward the ceiling. A shot went off, shattering the chandelier above them. "If they get you, they win. Run." In that moment, Ellen realized the terrifying truth of her situation. She wasn't just a wife or a victim anymore. She was the most valuable piece on the board. She turned and ran, the sound of Arthur's grunts and the crashing of furniture fading behind her. She reached the end of the corridor and threw herself into the darkness of the emergency chute, the cold wind whistling past her ears as she spiraled downward. As she hit the padded mats in the garage 40 stories below, the door of a black armored SUV slid open. Clarice was there, her face grim. "Where's Arthur?" Clarice demanded. "He's still up there," Ellen panted, clutching the ring to her chest as if it were her own heart. "Rick betrayed him. The Kims are inside." Clarice didn't waste time. She hauled Ellen into the vehicle and slammed the door. As the SUV roared to life and tore out of the garage, Ellen looked back at the towering penthouse. Smoke was beginning to curl from the top floor. She was out. She was away from the house. But the man who had told her she could never leave was still inside a burning cage, and the ring on her finger felt heavier than the world itself. The armored SUV screeched through the rain-slicked streets of Gangnam, weaving through traffic with a reckless disregard for life. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and Ellen's frantic, ragged breathing. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking so violently she had to sit on them to keep from vibrating out of her seat. The black diamond on her finger felt like a glowing ember, drawing every shadow toward her. "We can't just leave him, Clarice." Ellen screamed over the roar of the engine. "Rick was going to kill him. The Kims. They'll do things to him to find out where I am." Clarice Starling didn't take her eyes off the road. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her jaw set in a line of iron. "Arthur gave me one order, Ellen. One. Protect the vault. In his world, you aren't a person right now. You are the survival of the Pendragon line. If I go back for him and we both die, the Empire falls within the hour." "I don't care about the Empire," Ellen cried, a sob finally breaking through her chest. "You should," Clarice snapped, glancing at the rearview mirror as a pair of black motorcycles swerved into their lane behind them. "Because if that Empire falls, there is no one left on this earth with the power to keep you out of a labor camp or a shallow grave. You're the most expensive woman in the world, Ellen. Start acting like it." Clarice reached into the center console and pulled out a burner phone, tossing it into Ellen's lap. "Check the encrypted messages. There's a contact labeled The Alchemist. Find out if the extraction point in Incheon is still green." Ellen fumbled with the phone, her vision blurred by tears. As she navigated the dark web interface, she felt a sickening realization. Every interaction she'd had with Arthur, the quiet dinners where he'd watched her read, the way he'd draped his coat over her shoulders when she looked cold, it was all shadowed by this. Was he protecting her, or was he protecting the bank account on her finger? The motorcycles were gaining. The riders wore sleek aerodynamic helmets and carried submachine guns. One of them pulled alongside the SUV, the muzzle of his weapon glinting under the streetlights. "Get down!" Clarice roared. A spray of lead peppered the reinforced glass of the passenger window. The spiderweb cracks bloomed instantly, but the glass held. Clarice slammed the brakes, the SUV fishtailing wildly. The sudden deceleration caught the biker off guard. He overshot them and Clarice pivoted the heavy vehicle, ramming into his rear wheel. The bike flipped, a violent spray of sparks and metal sliding across the asphalt before the rider was swallowed by the darkness of a side alley. "One down," Clarice grunted, but her face remained grim. "There will be 20 more behind him." They pulled into a derelict warehouse district near the docks, the smell of salt and rotting fish replacing the scent of luxury perfume. Clarice killed the lights and rolled the SUV into a cavernous, rusted structure. "We wait here for 10 minutes, Clarice whispered, her hand hovering over her sidearm. "If the alchemist doesn't show, we head for the coast on foot." In the oppressive silence of the warehouse, Ellen looked at the ring again. She remembered the night Arthur had given it to her. He had been so formal, his hands slightly trembling. A detail she had thought was nerves but now realized was the weight of the secret. "Clarice," Ellen whispered. "Why did he pick me? Really? He said I was pure, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Clarice sighed, the first sign of human emotion she'd shown. Arthur's father, Vito, didn't just hide the money. He hid the truth about who killed Arthur's mother. The vault contains the evidence that could bring down half the government and the entire Kim family. Arthur didn't just want a wife, he wanted a sanctuary. He thought that if he put the truth on the hand of someone he could care for, he might finally have a reason to stop being a monster. Ellen's heart twisted. The substitute bride wasn't just a tactical move. It was a desperate attempt by a violent man to anchor himself to something soft, something real. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the rafters above. Ellen gasped, but Clarice held up a hand. A man stepped into the dim light. He was older, with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like a map of 1,000 wars. This was Victor Laszlo, known in the underworld as the Alchemist. "The girl is safe?" Victor asked, his voice like dry parchment. "For now," Clarice replied. "But the Kims have the boss. We need to decode the first layer of the ring to unlock the emergency funds for a rescue op." Victor stepped toward Ellen, reaching for her hand. "It is a masterpiece of engineering. The code is etched in layers. It requires a specific biorhythm to unlock the final sequence. If she's too stressed, the metal won't expand correctly for the scan. So I have to be calm?" Ellen laughed bitterly. "While my husband is being tortured and I'm being hunted like an animal?" "Precisely," Victor said, pulling out a high-resolution scanner. "Focus on him, Ellen. Not the boss but the man. Find the memory that makes you feel safest." Ellen closed her eyes. She thought of a rainy Tuesday 3 months ago. Arthur had found her in the library, asleep over a book. He hadn't woken her. He had simply sat in the chair across from her, watching the rain, his hand resting near hers on the table. For a brief moment he hadn't been a Mafia don and she hadn't been a debtor. They were just two people existing in the same space, sharing a silence that didn't feel heavy. The ring began to hum. A faint, violet light pulsed from the black diamond. "It's working," Victor whispered. "The first layer is opening. I can see the—" A massive explosion rocked the warehouse. The corrugated metal walls buckled inward as a black tactical van smashed through the entrance. "They found us!" Clarice screamed, drawing her weapon. From the van stepped a man Ellen recognized from the news. Lee Chong, the youngest and most sadistic of the Kim brothers. He held a tablet in one hand and a detonator in the other. "Ellen Ripley," Lee called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You have something of mine. And I have something of yours." He flipped the tablet around. The screen showed a grainy live feed. Arthur was strapped to a chair in a room with no windows. He was bloodied, his shirt torn, but his eyes were wide and fixed on the camera. If you don't walk out here in the next 60 seconds, Lee said with a sickening grin, I don't just kill him. I send the signal to the ring. Did Arthur tell you about the failsafe? If the wrong pulse is sent, the ring doesn't just wipe the data. It contains a small, pressurized thermite charge. It will take your hand off, Ellen, before it melts the diamond. Ellen looked at Clarice, then at the screen, then at the ring. The tension was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She had the key to an empire, but she was holding a bomb. And the only man who could help her was watching her die through a screen. Don't do it, Ellen. Arthur's voice cracked through the tablet speakers, raw and desperate. Run. But Ellen didn't run. She stood up, her hand glowing violet, and stepped into the light. The armored SUV screeched through the rain-slicked streets of Gangnam, weaving through traffic with a reckless disregard for life. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and Ellen's frantic, ragged breathing. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking so violently she had to sit on them to keep from vibrating out of her seat. The black diamond on her finger felt like a glowing ember, drawing every shadow toward her. We can't just leave him, Clarice. Ellen screamed over the roar of the engine. Rick was going to kill him. The Kims. They'll do things to him to find out where I am. Clarice Starling didn't take her eyes off the road. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her jaw set in a line of iron. Arthur gave me one order, Ellen. 1. Protect the vault. In his world, you aren't a person right now. You are the survival of the Pendragon line. If I go back for him and we both die, the Empire falls within the hour. I don't care about the Empire. Ellen cried, a sob finally breaking through her chest. You should, Clarice snapped, glancing at the rearview mirror as a pair of black motorcycles swerved into their lane behind them. Because if that Empire falls, there is no one left on this earth with the power to keep you out of a labor camp or a shallow grave. You're the most expensive woman in the world, Ellen. Start acting like it. Clarice reached into the center console and pulled out a burner phone, tossing it into Ellen's lap. Check the encrypted messages. There's a contact labeled The Alchemist. Find out if the extraction point in Incheon is still green. Ellen fumbled with the phone, her vision blurred by tears. As she navigated the dark web interface, she felt a sickening realization. Every interaction she'd had with Arthur, the quiet dinners where he'd watched her read, the way he draped his coat over her shoulders when she looked cold, it was all shadowed by this. Was he protecting her, or was he protecting the bank account on her finger? The motorcycles were gaining. The riders wore sleek aerodynamic helmets and carried submachine guns. One of them pulled alongside the SUV, the muzzle of his weapon glinting under the streetlights. Get down! Clarice roared. A spray of lead peppered the reinforced glass of the passenger window. The spiderweb cracks bloomed instantly, but the glass held. Clarice slammed the brakes, the SUV fishtailing wildly. The sudden deceleration caught the biker off guard. He overshot them and Clarice pivoted the heavy vehicle, ramming into his rear wheel. The bike flipped, a violent spray of sparks and metal sliding across the asphalt before the rider was swallowed by the darkness of a side alley. One down, Clarice grunted, but her face remained grim. There will be 20 more behind him. They pulled into a derelict warehouse district near the docks, the smell of salt and rotting fish replacing the scent of luxury perfume. Clarice killed the lights and rolled the SUV into a cavernous, rusted structure. We wait here for 10 minutes, Clarice whispered, her hand hovering over her sidearm. If the alchemist doesn't show, we head for the coast on foot. In the oppressive silence of the warehouse, Ellen looked at the ring again. She remembered the night Arthur had given it to her. He had been so formal, his hands slightly trembling. A detail she had thought was nerves but now realized was the weight of the secret. Clarice, Ellen whispered. Why did he pick me? Really? He said I was pure, but there's more to it, isn't there? Clarice sighed, the first sign of human emotion she'd shown. Arthur's father, Vito, didn't just hide the money. He hid the truth about who killed Arthur's mother. The vault contains the evidence that could bring down half the government and the entire Kim family. Arthur didn't just want a wife, he wanted a sanctuary. He thought that if he put the truth on the hand of someone he could care for, he might finally have a reason to stop being a monster. Ellen's heart twisted. The substitute bride wasn't just a tactical move. It was a desperate attempt by a violent man to anchor himself to something soft, something real. Suddenly, a A shadow detached itself from the rafters above. Ellen gasped, but Clarice held up a hand. A man stepped into the dim light. He was older, with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like a map of 1,000 wars. This was Victor Laszlo, known in the underworld as the Alchemist. "The girl is safe?" Victor asked, his voice like dry parchment. "For now," Clarice replied. "But the Kims have the boss. We need to decode the first layer of the ring to unlock the emergency funds for a rescue op." Victor stepped toward Ellen, reaching for her hand. "It is a masterpiece of engineering. The code is etched in layers. It requires a specific biorhythm to unlock the final sequence. If she's too stressed, the metal won't expand correctly for the scan. So I have to be calm?" Ellen laughed bitterly. "While my husband is being tortured and I'm being hunted like an animal?" "Precisely," Victor said, pulling out a high-resolution scanner. "Focus on him, Ellen. Not the boss but the man. Find the memory that makes you feel safest." Ellen closed her eyes. She thought of a rainy Tuesday 3 months ago. Arthur had found her in the library, asleep over a book. He hadn't woken her. He had simply sat in the chair across from her, watching the rain, his hand resting near hers on the table. For a brief moment he hadn't been a Mafia don and she hadn't been a debtor. They were just two people existing in the same space, sharing a silence that didn't feel heavy. The ring began to hum. A faint, violet light pulsed from the black diamond. "It's working," Victor whispered. "The first layer is opening. I can see the—" A massive explosion rocked the warehouse. The corrugated metal walls buckled inward as a black tactical van smashed through the entrance. "They found us!" Clarice screamed, drawing her weapon. From the van stepped a man Ellen recognized from the news. Lee Chong, the youngest and most sadistic of the Kim brothers. He held a tablet in one hand and a detonator in the other. "Ellen Ripley," Lee called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You have something of mine. And I have something of yours." He flipped the tablet around. The screen showed a grainy live feed. Arthur was strapped to a chair in a room with no windows. He was bloodied, his shirt torn, but his eyes were wide and fixed on the camera. "If you don't walk out here in the next 60 seconds, Lee said with a sickening grin, "I don't just kill him. I send the signal to the ring. Did Arthur tell you about the failsafe? If the wrong pulse is sent, the ring doesn't just wipe the data. It contains a small, pressurized thermite charge. It will take your hand off, Ellen, before it melts the diamond." Ellen looked at Clarice, then at the screen, then at the ring. The tension was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She had the key to an empire, but she was holding a bomb. And the only man who could help her was watching her die through a screen. "Don't do it, Ellen." Arthur's voice cracked through the tablet speakers, raw and desperate. "Run." But Ellen didn't run. She stood up, her hand glowing violet, and stepped into the light. The warehouse erupted into a hellscape of crossfire. The three-way war between Lee Chang's Kims, Rick Blaine's mercenaries, and Arthur's remaining loyalists turned the air into a storm of lead and jagged metal. But for Ellen, the world had gone silent. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it hollowed her out. She looked at Arthur, who was being shielded by Clarice amidst the chaos, and for the first time she didn't see her protector. She saw her owner. "Get her to the van." Rick Blaine's voice roared over the gunfire. "I don't care if she's screaming. Just get that hand." A grenade detonated near the entrance, the shockwave throwing Ellen toward the back of the warehouse, near the edge of the darkened pier. She hit the concrete hard, the wind knocked out of her. As she struggled to rise, a hand clamped over her mouth. It was cold, smelling of expensive leather and tobacco. "Hush, little bird," Lee Chong whispered in her ear. He had slipped through the smoke. In his other hand he held a surgical scalpel. Arthur was right about one thing. This ring is a masterpiece. But the sensors only care about the pulse in the finger. They don't care if the finger is still attached to the girl. Ellen's eyes widened in primal terror. She thrashed, but Lee was a trained killer. He pinned her against a rusted shipping container, the blade gleaming in the strobe light of the muzzle flashes. "Stop." Arthur's voice was a ragged scream. He was 20 yards away, limping, his shoulder soaked in blood where a bullet had grazed him. He had no weapon. He had used his last rounds to cover Clarice. He stood exposed in the middle of the kill zone, his eyes locked on Ellen with a desperation that finally looked real. But to Ellen, it was too late to tell the difference. "Let her go, Lee." Arthur shouted, his voice cracking. I'll give you the bypass codes. I'll give you the physical keys to the soul docks. Just leave her out of this. You'd give up the docks for a keycard, Arthur? Lee mocked, pressing the blade against the base of Alan's ring finger. You're getting soft. Or maybe you've finally realized that without her, you're just a man in an expensive suit with a zeroed-out bank account. It's not about the money. Arthur took a step forward, his hands raised. I lied to her. I used her. But I won't let you break her. Rick Blaine's mercenaries opened fire on Arthur's position. Arthur dove behind a stack of pallets, the wood splintering above his head. In the confusion, Alan saw her moment. She bit down on Lee's hand with everything she had. He hissed in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Alan didn't run toward Arthur. She didn't run toward the exit. She ran toward the black, churning water of the harbor. Alan, no. Arthur's scream was lost in the wind. She reached the edge of the pier. Behind her, the warehouse was a funeral pyre of the Pendragon legacy. Rick and Lee's forces were closing in, a pincer movement of greed. She looked down at the ring. It was pulsing a frantic, angry red now, responding to the absolute despair in her soul. If I'm the key, she thought, her heart breaking, then I'm taking the door with me. She didn't jump. She was tackled from behind. But it wasn't a savior. It was Rick Blaine. He slammed her into the gravel, his face a mask of fury. You're not dying until I've drained every cent out of that diamond, you little brat. He began to drag her toward his vehicle, but a sudden, deafening roar drowned out the gunfire. A fleet of black helicopters bearing no markings descended from the sky. This wasn't the police. This was the internal affairs of the underworld, the council. The very people Arthur's father had tried to hide the money from. They didn't take sides. They opened fire on everyone. In the absolute carnage that followed, Alan was separated from everyone. A flashbang grenade detonated feet away, plunging her world into a white, ringing void. When her vision cleared, she was alone in the shadow of a capsized barge. The warehouse was a distant orange glow. She was freezing, her clothes soaked with rain and sea spray. Her husband had betrayed her since she was a child. Her friends were dead or traitors. And the most powerful men in Asia were hunting her like a fox in a thicket. She looked at her hand. The ring was cold now. The vault had locked itself down in response to the trauma. She was no longer a queen or a keycard or even a wife. She was a ghost again, lost in the dark with no one to trust and nowhere to go. She curled into a ball under the rusted hull of the barge, the sound of the rain masking her sobs. This was the darkest hour. The empire was in ruins, and the woman who held the pieces was broken beyond repair. She had never felt more alone in the vast, cruel world. "Papa," she whispered to the memory of the man who had sold her life to a monster. "Why didn't you just let us be poor?" As the sun began to peek through the smog of the Incheon docks, Alan Ripley sat in the dirt, clutching a billion-dollar secret, wishing she could just disappear into the gray light of a world that no longer had a place for her. The dawn over the Incheon docks was a bruised purple, the light struggling to pierce the thick industrial fog. Alan Ripley didn't feel like a victim anymore. The cold had seeped into her bones, but it had also frozen the tears. The sobbing had stopped, replaced by a hollow, ringing clarity. She looked at her reflection in a puddle of oil and rainwater. Her face was smudged with soot, her silk dress was a rag, and her eyes were hardened into something she didn't recognize. She wasn't just a keycard. She was the daughter of the man who built the maze. "You didn't sell me, did you, Papa?" she whispered into the wind. She looked at the ring. If her father was the architect, he wouldn't have just made a vault for a mafia boss. He would have built an emergency exit. She closed her eyes and ignored the throbbing in her hand. She thought back to her childhood, not the fake memories the Pendragons had polished but the real ones. Her father used to play a game with her called the hidden verse. He would read a line of poetry and she would have to find the hidden word that didn't rhyme. She looked at the micro-engraving through the lens of that memory. The code wasn't just math, it was a sequence. The rhyme that doesn't fit. Amidst the strings of financial data and asset locations, there was a string of text that was out of place. A line from a poem her father used to recite to her. She hummed the melody of the poem, her heart rate stabilizing, her mind focusing with a precision she had inherited from the architect. As her pulse hit a specific rhythmic frequency, not one of fear but of focused intent, The ring didn't glow violet. It turned a steady, brilliant white. The vault didn't just open. It flipped. A small compartment on the side of the diamond housing clicked open, revealing a microtransceiver. It wasn't a beacon for the council. It was a kill switch for every electronic lock in the Pendragon and Kim networks. Her father hadn't just given her the money. He had given her the ability to turn off the world that tried to own her. Ellen. A shadow stumbled through the fog. It was Arthur. He was alone, his white shirt now almost entirely red. He was pale, leaning heavily against a rusted crane, his breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. He had escaped the warehouse, but he was a dying king in a crumbling kingdom. Ellen stood up. She didn't run to him and she didn't run away. She stood her ground as he collapsed a few feet from her. I found the car. Arthur wheezed, holding out a set of keys with a trembling hand. Get out of here, Ellen. Go to the safe house in Jeju. The council, they won't find you there. The ring, it has enough to buy you a new name. A new life. Why are you helping me now? Ellen asked, her voice cold as the sea. Is it because the vault won't open without me? Are you just protecting the investment until the very end? Arthur looked up at her and for the first time there was no mask. No boss, no predator. Just a man who had been a pawn in his father's game as much as she had been. Because you were the only thing in that house that wasn't a lie, he whispered. I was raised to see people as assets, Ellen. But when you looked at me, before you knew, you saw me. Not the boss. Not the Pendragon heir. Just Arthur. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I don't want the money. I don't want the empire. I just want you to be free of it. Even if that means you're free of me. He slumped against the crane, his eyes closing. In that moment, Ellen saw the truth. Arthur had been a monster, yes. He had been a liar and a manipulator. But he was also a man who had been shaped by the same cage she was currently standing in. And in his final moments of power, he was trying to break the lock for her. Don't you dare die on me, Arthur Pendragon, Ellen said, kneeling beside him. Not until you see what the architect really built. She pressed the microtransceiver on the ring. The signal went out. Suddenly, the black helicopters of the council, which had been circling the docks like vultures, began to veer off. Their navigation systems were being flooded with false data. The tactical vans of the Kim faction, visible on the horizon, ground to a halt as their engines were remotely disabled by the ring's override. Clarice, do you copy? Ellen spoke into the burner phone she had recovered from the dirt. Ellen? How are you still? Clarice's voice was filled with shock. I have the override, Ellen commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that would have made Vito Corleone himself flinch. I am the architect's daughter and I am the matriarch of this house. Secure the perimeter. Get a medical team to my coordinates. If a single Kim or council member moves within a mile of this dock, I will wipe their offshore accounts to zero and broadcast their locations to every police agency in Asia. There was a long silence on the other end. Then a click of heels. Copy that, ma'am. We're 5 minutes out. Ellen turned back to Arthur. She took his hand, the hand that had first put the ring on her finger, and laced her fingers through his. The ring sat between them, no longer a shackle but a shield. You said this ring isn't leaving this house, Ellen whispered to his semi-conscious form. You were right. But this isn't your father's house anymore. It's mine. And I'm deciding who gets to live in it. The turning point was complete. The victim had become the victor, not by escaping the war, but by seizing the weapons of the men who started it. The medical team Clarice had summoned was still 3 minutes away when the world turned to fire. The Incheon docks, usually a labyrinth of steel and salt, became a kill zone. From the shadows of the massive shipping cranes, the remnants of the Kim faction and Rick Blaine's mercenaries emerged. They were no longer fighting each other. The sight of the white light from Ellen's ring had signaled a total asset breach. For the vultures, the only thing left was to kill the host and scavenge the carcass. There they are, a voice screamed. It was Rick Blaine. He looked like a man possessed, his face contorted with a greed so pure it was terrifying. He stepped into the light of the dawning sun, brandishing a heavy-caliber rifle. Beside him, Lee Chong emerged, his surgical scalpel replaced by a jagged combat knife. The girl and the dying man, Lee sneered, his eyes fixed on the glowing ring. A pathetic end for a Mafia king. Ellen stood up, stepping in front of Arthur's slumped body. She felt the cold wind whipping her hair across her face, but she didn't blink. The ring was huming against her skin, a vibration that felt like a heartbeat, her father's heartbeat. "You don't understand what you're looking at," Ellen said, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the surrounding steel containers. "You think this is just money. You think it's just a ledger. It's power." Rick roared, leveling his rifle. "And it belongs to the man with the nerve to take it." "No," Ellen countered, her finger hovering over the final sequence on the ring's microinterface. "It's a mirror. My father knew that men like you, men like Vito and the Kims, would never stop until you owned everything. So he built a trap for the greedy." She pressed the sequence. Suddenly, every screen in the harbor, the logistics monitors on the cranes, the tablets in the mercenaries' hands, even the billboards visible on the distant highway, flickered to life. It wasn't financial data that appeared. It was the blood ledger. A stream of high-definition video files began to play. It was the black box footage of the underworld. Rick Blaine's secret meetings with the council to betray Arthur. Lee Chang's elder brother being poisoned by Lee himself. The offshore accounts of the very politicians who protected the Kims. "What are you doing?" Lee screamed, his face paling as he watched his own betrayal broadcast to the world. "I'm not just opening the vault, Lee," Ellen said, her eyes burning with a fierce, cold justice. "I'm opening the curtains. The Pendragon legacy is over. The Kim dynasty is over. As of this second, the data is being uploaded to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the world. You aren't kings anymore. You're just evidence." The mercenaries froze. They were professional killers, but they weren't martyrs. Without the promise of a payout and with the certainty of a global manhunt, the loyalty they held for Rick and Lee evaporated instantly. "Kill her!" Rick screamed at his men. "Kill her and take the ring before the upload finishes." But no one moved. The sound of sirens, hundreds of them, began to wail from the city side of the docks. The local police, the National Guard, and the international agencies were converging, spurred by the data dump Ellen had just initiated. "I'll do it myself," Rick roared, raising his rifle. A single shot rang out. It didn't come from Rick. It came from the ground. Arthur Pendragon, using the last of his strength, had found the handgun Ellen had tucked into his belt earlier. His hand was shaking, but his aim was true. The bullet caught Rick in the shoulder, spinning him around. At the same moment, Clarice Starling and her tactical team breached the perimeter from the seaward side. "Drop your weapons." Clarice's voice boomed through a megaphone. Lee Chong, seeing the end of his world, lunged at Ellen with his combat knife. "If I can't have the Empire, no one will." Ellen didn't flinch. She used the weight of the ring, the heavy, solid platinum, as a brass knuckle. As Lee lunged, she stepped inside his guard and punched with every ounce of her bottled-up rage. The ring caught Lee squarely in the jaw, the impact sending him spiraling into the oily water of the harbor. The remaining mercenaries dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The war was over. Clarice's team swarmed the area, securing Rick Blaine and pulling a spluttering Lee Chong from the water in handcuffs. But Ellen didn't watch them. She knelt back down beside Arthur, who was staring at her with a look of profound awe. "You destroyed it all," Arthur whispered, a faint smile touching his blood-stained lips. "The money, the secrets, it's all gone." "No," Ellen said, the white light of the ring fading into a soft, warm glow. "I didn't destroy it. I cleaned the house. The assets that were stolen from the people are going back to the people. The evidence is with the law. And the ring." She looked at the black diamond. The vault was empty now, the code spent. It was just a piece of jewelry again. But it was also something else. It was the first honest thing they shared. "The ring is staying right where it is," she said. As the paramedics rushed in to stabilize Arthur, he reached out and squeezed her hand. For the first time since they had met, there was no contract between them. No debt. No collateral. Just two survivors watching the sun rise over a city that was finally, for the first time in 20 years, quiet. The twist wasn't that Ellen saved the Empire. The twist was that she had the courage to burn it down so she could build something real in the ashes. 6 months later, the air in the Jeju Island villa didn't smell like gunpowder or expensive cologne. It smelled of sea salt and blooming jasmine. Ellen Ripley sat on the sun-drenched veranda, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. She was watching the waves hit the jagged black rocks of the coastline. The internal affairs of the underworld had been dismantled, the Kims were serving life sentences in a high-security facility, and Rick Blaine had vanished into the witness protection system, not as a hero but as a rat. The Pendragon Empire was gone. The assets had been liquidated and funneled into a foundation that funded education and legal aid for families destroyed by the syndicate's decades of greed. Ellen had kept nothing but the villa and a small modest stipend. She didn't want the weight of a crown anymore. A shadow fell across the page. She didn't look up to know who it was. The steady, slightly uneven gait was familiar now, the rhythm of a man who had survived a death sentence and was learning to walk in a world that didn't fear him. "The doctor said you should be resting," Ellen said, a small smile playing on her lips. Arthur Pendragon sat in the wicker chair beside her. He looked different without the tailored suits. In a simple linen shirt, with the sunlight catching the faint scars on his jaw, he looked like the man she had glimpsed in the library all those months ago. "I've spent enough of my life lying down or hiding, Ellen," Arthur said, his voice stronger than it had been at the docks. He reached out, hesitating for a second before resting his hand on the arm of her chair. "Besides, Clarice is on the phone. She's complaining that running a legitimate security firm is boring compared to the old days." Ellen laughed. Clarice Starling had taken the loyalists who wanted a clean start and turned them into one of the most respected private security agencies in Asia. They didn't protect vaults anymore. They protected people. "And you?" Ellen asked, finally turning to look at him. "Are you bored?" Arthur looked out at the ocean, his dark eyes reflecting the vast, open horizon. "For the first time in 32 years, I don't wake up wondering who is going to try to kill me before lunch. I don't think I'll ever be bored of that." He looked down at Ellen's hand. She still wore the ring. The black diamond had been removed, replaced by a simple clear stone that held no codes, no microscopic engravings and no secrets. It was just a ring. "I never asked," Arthur said softly. "Why did you keep it? After everything I did, after how it started." Ellen looked at the band. "Because it reminded me that I wasn't just a substitute. My father built this for me to find my way back to myself. And you were the one who held on to it until I was ready to see it." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. "The contract is over, Arthur. The vault is empty. If you're still here, it's because you want to be. And if I'm still here, it's for the same reason." Arthur leaned over and pressed a lingering kiss to her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that wasn't calculated for a camera or a rival. It was the first day of the rest of their lives. The architect's daughter and the fallen king were no longer pieces on a board. They were just two people sitting in the sun watching the tide come in. The secrets had been told, the debts had been paid, and the house was finally at peace. As the sun began to set, casting a golden path across the water, Ellen closed her book. There would be no more sequels of violence, no more chapters of betrayal. Their story had finally found its home,